Somewhere in your jaw right now, there might be a tooth trying to arrive at a party that ended a long time ago. It pushes. It aches. Sometimes it gets stuck sideways, pressing into the tooth next to it like a passenger squeezing onto a train that's already full. You call it a wisdom tooth. Dentists call it impacted. But the real story isn't about your teeth at all. It's about your skull. And it's far stranger than anyone tells you in the waiting room. Your face used to be bigger. Not you personally. Your species. Somewhere between 50,000 and 10,000 years ago, something started happening to the human skull that had never happened before at this speed. The jaw began shrinking, not the teeth. The teeth stayed roughly the same size they'd been for tens of thousands of years. Just the bone around them started retreating, like a house getting smaller while the furniture inside stayed exactly the same size. Think about what that means for a second. Imagine a bookshelf built for 12 books. Now imagine someone quietly shaves an inch off the shelf every few thousand years, but never removes a single book. Eventually, there's nowhere left to put the last one. That last book is your wisdom tooth. It didn't get bigger. Your shelf got smaller. Why would a skull shrink? This is where it gets interesting. The anthropologist C. Loring Brace spent decades studying skulls from different periods of human history, and he noticed something that seemed almost too simple to be true. As human diets changed, jaws changed with them. Harder, tougher food demands a bigger jaw, more muscle, more bone to anchor that muscle. Softer food doesn't. Brace tracked this shrinkage across thousands of years of skeletal remains and found a pattern that lined up almost perfectly with the rise of cooking, then agriculture, then processed food. Each shift towards softer eating came with a jaw slightly smaller than the one before it. Your ancestors were not eating dinner the way you eat dinner. They were eating meals that fought back. Raw roots, tough meat torn straight off bone, fibrous plants that had to be ground down by dozens of chews before they were even worth swallowing. Every meal was, in a very real sense, jaw exercise. And bone responds to exercise. Use a muscle, and its anchor grows stronger and larger. Stop using it, and the body reallocates the resources elsewhere. Your jaw is bone. Bone listens to stress. Less stress, less growth. Then cooking arrived, and chewing got easier. Then agriculture arrived, and food got softer still, ground into porridges and gruels. Then, more recently, food processing arrived. And now you can go through an entire day without a single bite requiring real effort from your jaw. A smoothie, a piece of bread, a bowl of pasta. None of it asks anything of the muscles your ancestors relied on daily. Your jaw has, in a sense, been given a very long vacation. But vacations change bodies. Muscles that don't work shrink. Bone that isn't stressed doesn't build itself outward. Generation after generation, that quiet, comfortable ease left its signature on the human face. Your teeth, meanwhile, weren't listening to any of this. Tooth size is controlled by a different, slower genetic timeline. It doesn't respond to how much you chew this week or how tender your dinner was. So while the jaw kept adapting to a softening world, generation after generation, the teeth just kept showing up at their usual size, expecting a jaw built for their grandparents' skulls and their grandparents' grandparents. This is called a mismatch. And it's one of the strangest stories in the entire human body, because it means part of you is still living in the wrong era. There's a researcher named Robert Corruccini who wanted to know if this was really about food or if it was something else entirely like modern genetics or some accident of evolution. So he did something clever. He studied the jaws of people who ate industrialized, processed diets and compared them to people from the same genetic populations who still ate traditional, harder diets. Same ancestry. Same genes, roughly. Different food. The results were almost eerie. Populations eating traditional, tougher diets had wider jaws, straighter teeth, and far fewer cases of crowding or impaction. Populations who had switched to soft, modern, processed food, sometimes within a single generation, showed dramatically higher rates of crowded teeth and misalignment. Same bloodline. Same genetic starting point. Completely different mouse. That's not a coincidence. That's your jaw responding in real time to what you're asking it to do. It's a rare case where you can watch evolution's usual excuse that it takes thousands of years fall apart within a single family. A grandmother raised on tough, whole foods. A grandchild raised on soft, processed ones. Two very different jaws, built from nearly identical genetic material. What makes Corruccini's work so striking is how quickly the change showed up. This wasn't a slow drift across dozens of generations. In some of the populations he studied, the shift from traditional to industrialized diets happened within living memory, sometimes within a single lifetime as communities moved from villages to cities, or as store-bought, processed staples replaced foods that used to be grown, hunted, or gathered locally. And the jaws changed right along with the plates. That's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Your skeleton isn't a fixed blueprint stamped out at birth and left untouched. It's closer to a structure that keeps responding to the forces placed on it throughout childhood and adolescence, right up until the jaw finishes growing. Chew hard food as a child, and the jaw tends to grow to accommodate it. Chew mostly soft food, and it doesn't. Which brings you back to your own mouth. Sitting there right now, possibly a little sore, possibly home to at least one tooth that never found room to fully emerge. You didn't do anything wrong. You weren't cursed with bad genetics. You were simply born at the tail end of a 10,000-year trend toward eating things that require less and less effort. Your jaw adapted to a modern world. Your teeth did not get the memo. Here's where it gets even stranger, though. Wisdom teeth weren't always a problem. Go back far enough, and the third molars, which is the technical name for wisdom teeth, weren't crowded latecomers. They were simply the back row of a full, functioning set of 32 teeth in a jaw that had plenty of room for all of them. Skeletal remains from tens of thousands of years ago routinely show wisdom teeth sitting comfortably in place, doing their job, chewing right alongside everything else. There was no impaction, no surgery, no swelling, just teeth, doing what teeth are supposed to do, in a jaw built to hold them. Your body has not changed its blueprint for teeth in a very long time. What changed is the room available to build on. This is why, before modern dentistry existed, an impacted wisdom tooth wasn't just an inconvenience. It could be dangerous. Without antibiotics, without surgical extraction, an infected molar trapped beneath the gum line had nowhere to drain. Historical medical records from before the 20th century describe deaths from dental infections that today would be resolved with a single office visit and a course of medication. What is now a scheduled Tuesday morning procedure used to be, for some unlucky people, a genuine threat to life. The mismatch between your jaw and your teeth isn't new. What's new is how easily modern medicine papers over it. Consider for a moment how unusual this is compared to the rest of the animal kingdom. Other primates don't struggle with impacted molars the way humans do. Chimpanzees, whose diets remain rougher and more mechanically demanding than the average modern humans, tend to have jaws large enough to comfortably fit their full set of teeth. It's not that their teeth are smaller. It's that their jaws never went through the same rapid softening. Humans are, in this narrow sense, an outlier among primates, having changed their food faster than their skeletons could keep up. It helps to picture the timeline side by side. Chewing hard, resistant food is something the primate lineage has done for tens of millions of years. Cooking food, which softens it dramatically, is something humans have only been doing reliably for a few 100,000 years at most. Farming, which introduced grains and mashed, boiled, and ground foods on a massive scale, is only about 10,000 years old. Industrial food processing, the kind that gives you bread that barely requires chewing at all, is only a few centuries old, and ultra-processed convenience food is only a few decades old. Each of those transitions happened faster than the one before it. Your jaw has been asked to keep adjusting to an accelerating series of changes, and it simply hasn't had enough time, in evolutionary terms, to catch up with the most recent ones. The Harvard evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman has spent years studying what he calls mismatch diseases, conditions that exist not because something in the body is broken, but because the environment shifted faster than evolution could keep pace. Diabetes linked to sudden sugar abundance. Flat feet linked to a lifetime spent in cushioned shoes instead of walking barefoot. And right alongside them, impacted wisdom teeth, linked to jaws shaped by porridge and bread and blended smoothies instead of raw roots and tough meat. None of these are evolutionary failures. They're evolutionary lag. Your body is extremely good at adapting. It's just adapting to a world that no longer exists, using instructions written for one that doesn't. So why do you still grow wisdom teeth at all, if they cause so much trouble? Why hasn't evolution just quietly deleted them by now? Because 10,000 years is nothing to evolution. It sounds enormous to you. It is a blink to a genome. Evolution doesn't respond to trends over a few hundred generations, especially not for a trait like tooth number that isn't, on its own, deadly enough to shape who survives to pass on their genes. Impacted wisdom teeth are painful. Occasionally they get infected. But in the modern world, with dentistry available, they are almost never fatal, which means there's very little evolutionary pressure pushing your genome to simply stop building them. In other words, you're not stuck with wisdom teeth because your body made a mistake. You're stuck with them because your body hasn't had a good enough reason, in evolutionary terms, to stop. Picture it this way. Your DNA is running a very old set of instructions, copied and passed down with only small edits, generation after generation, like a recipe handed from grandmother to granddaughter for 10,000 years without ever being updated for the fact that the kitchen changed. The recipe still calls for a bigger pot. Nobody bought a bigger pot. The recipe doesn't know that. It just keeps calling for one. There's something almost moving about that, if you sit with it for a second. Every time a wisdom tooth pushes up, uncomfortable and unwelcome, it's not a glitch. It's a message from an ancestor who lived somewhere between 50,000 and 10,000 years ago, someone whose jaw was built to chew raw meat off a bone, still faithfully sending instructions forward through time. Grow the tooth. Make room. As if that ancestor has no idea the room disappeared a long time ago. Now think about your own jaw for a moment, not as something that failed you, but as a kind of living fossil. It carries the signature of every soft meal your ancestors chose over a hard one. Every time someone in your lineage figured out how to cook meat instead of tearing it raw, how to mash a root instead of gnawing it, how to grind grain into flour instead of chewing it whole, your jaw got a tiny bit smaller. Not because anything went wrong, because life got a little easier. And your body, generation after generation, quietly took the win. You inherited that ease. You also inherited the crowding that came with it. It's worth pausing on just how recent orthodontics is, given how permanent it feels in modern life. Braces, retainers, jaw expanders, none of these existed in any meaningful form until the last couple of centuries, and widespread orthodontic treatment is barely 100 years old. For nearly the entire span of human history, crowded teeth simply stayed crowded. There was no straightening. There was no realignment. People lived with whatever arrangement their jaw and their teeth worked out between themselves. The fact that so many people today need orthodontic correction at all is itself a symptom of the same mismatch, not a separate problem. Softer food didn't just shrink the jaw enough to crowd out the very back teeth. It shrank it enough to crowd everything, which is part of why straight, evenly spaced teeth without any intervention have become the exception rather than the rule in industrialized populations, while remaining common in populations still eating tougher, less processed diets. This is worth sitting with because it reframes something you've probably taken for granted. Modern dentistry treats wisdom teeth as a problem to be solved with forceps and a follow-up appointment. And it is, practically speaking, the right solution. But it's worth noticing that the surgery exists to correct a mismatch, not a defect. You are not broken. Your ancestors simply chose comfort over chewing, one soft meal at a time, for 10,000 years, and comfort came with a bill that eventually landed in your mouth. There's a reason this feels personal, even though it's really about your entire species. Because your mouth is one of the few places on your body where evolutionary history and your Tuesday afternoon collide directly. You can feel 10,000 years of dietary change in a single dull ache along your jawline. Most evolutionary stories stay buried in bones in museums, dug up by researchers with brushes and calipers. Yours is sitting behind your last molar, right now reminding you it's there. Think about how strange that actually is. You carry, quite literally in your own skull, the accumulated dietary decisions of thousands of generations you will never meet. Every ancestor who softened their food a little more than the generation before them left a small trace behind, a fraction of a millimeter less jaw, passed down and compounded over time until it became your face. Your cheekbones, your jawline, the exact shape of your smile, all of it carries some imprint of decisions made by people whose names have been lost for thousands of years, but whose eating habits somehow weren't. And it isn't finished. If humans keep eating softer, more processed food for another 10,000 years, jaws may keep shrinking further still. Some researchers who study this mismatch wonder whether future generations might eventually lose wisdom teeth altogether, not through any dramatic evolutionary event, but simply because a trait that causes no survival disadvantage, yet offers no benefit either, tends to drift and fade over enough generations. Your great-great-grandchildren might be born with jaws even smaller than yours. Or if humanity's teeth genes drift the other way, they might simply grow one fewer tooth from birth. No extraction required, no waiting room, no ache at all. Some people already do. A small percentage of the population today is born without one or more wisdom teeth ever forming at all. No impaction because there was never a tooth trying to arrive in the first place. It's a small, quiet preview of where this might all be headed. A hint that evolution may already be experimenting with simply not building the extra molar rather than continuing to build it into a jaw that has no space left. Nobody planned that. Nobody selected for it on purpose. It's just what happens when a trait stops matching for survival and starts drifting on its own, generation after generation, with no one steering it. So the next time your jaw aches in that particular way, in that spot at the very back, you're not just dealing with a dental inconvenience. You're standing at the exact point where an ancient set of instructions meets a modern shortage of space. Your teeth are doing exactly what they were designed to do, following directions written for a jaw that hasn't existed in your family line for thousands of years. It isn't that your teeth are wrong. It's that your skull got smaller and forgot to tell them.